أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة ويا عبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة يا مظلوم يا غريب يا شهيد كربلاء، يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإن خفتم ألا تقسطوا في اليتامى فانكحوا ما طاب لكم من النساء مثنى وثلاث ورباع، فإن خفتم ألا تعدلوا فواحدة. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. A second for the love of Imams Al-Hassan wal-Hussein. A third salawat for the love of Fatima al-Zahra with your loudest voices. Why in Islam is it allowed for men to marry up to 4 wives? This is a question that many people ask and many people are curious about. They like to know the answer. Why is it that in Islam men are allowed to marry up to 4 wives while women can only have 1 husband? This topic, the topic of polygamy in Islam, is extremely controversial. It's extremely sensitive, and it has not been debated academically and objectively. Most people, they use this topic, the topic of polygamy, to bring down Islam and Muslims and accuse them of being followers of a religion that disrespects women and doesn't give them their rights and takes advantage of them. Polygamy has always been associated with Islam. In fact, as soon as people hear the word polygamy, immediately they think of Islam and Muslims. They don't think of anyone else. If you go on Google and you put in the word polygamy, it gives you several choices. Among the first options is polygamy in Islam. This shows you the amount of association between polygamy, the practice of marrying more than one spouse, and Islam. While the origin of polygamy is not Islam, polygamy was practiced in Judaism by Jews and in Christianity by Christians. But you don't hear that on the news. You don't hear that Jews and Christians also marry more than one wife. You only hear it regarding Muslims, because there's a political agenda behind it. Because there's an agenda that wishes to defame Islam and Muslims. Thus you never hear the word polygamy associated with Judaism and Christianity. Tonight, my dear brothers and sisters, we'd like to examine this subject, the subject of polygamy, its different forms, polygamy in Judaism, polygamy in Christianity, and polygamy in Islam. Why did Islam allow polygamy? Why did Islam allow men to marry 4 wives? Why did Islam ban such a practice? And why doesn't Islam allow women to marry more than one husband? If there's equality in Islam, the same way that Islam allows men to marry more than one wife, it should allow women to marry also more than one husband. Furthermore, what rights does that first wife have? If her husband marries another wife, what rights does she have? This and other questions we shall examine tonight, inshaAllah. However, I'd like the brothers and sisters to keep in mind that this discussion is purely academic. We are not here encouraging men to go ahead and marry more than one wife. Thus, let the sisters be well assured that we are not encouraging their husbands to marry more than one wife and to marry another woman. No, this discussion is purely academic to defend Islam from such misconceptions of degrading women and not giving them their rights. So let's have open minds and open hearts and send a loud salawat. First of all, polygamy has different forms. Polygamy means for a person to marry more than one spouse. It could be a man marrying several wives, or a woman marrying several men. Thus the word polygamy means that both husband and wife could marry several spouses. Polygamy is the word that we need. Polygamy with an N entails only men being allowed to marry more than one wife. In Islam, what is practiced or what is allowed to be practiced is polygamy with an N, not polygamy with an M. Thus, polygamy is for both spouses to be able to marry more than one spouse. A husband can marry more than one wife, and a wife can marry more than one husband. Polygamy is when only the man is allowed to marry more than one wife. Polyandry is when only the woman is allowed to marry more than one husband. Thus, these are 3 different things. What exists in Islam and Judaism and Christianity is polygamy with an N. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We come to Judaism, we see that polygamy existed and it was practiced by Jews, by their earlier ancestors. It was practiced, it's been mentioned in Jewish history. Up till the biblical period, it was very well practiced. Proof that it exists in Judaism and that it's considered legitimate and it's recognized is that the Old Testament, the Torah, addresses polygamy and it has restrictions on it. The Old Testament introduces laws pertaining to polygamy. This is the biggest proof that Judaism accepts polygamy, and it recognizes it as a legitimate form of marriage. For example, in the book of Exodus, in the Old Testament, in chapter 21, verse 10, it says, "If he take another wife for himself, her food, clothing, and her duty of marriage, shall he not diminish?" Meaning, if a man marries another wife, then he needs to provide for her. For whom? His first wife. He should not forget his first wife. He should provide for her, her food, her clothing, and her rights. This tells you what? That polygamy is allowed. And this is one of the laws pertaining to polygamy in Judaism. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 15 to 17 in the Old Testament, it says, "A man must award inheritance due to the firstborn son, to the son who was actually born first, even if he hates that son's mother and likes another wife more." What is this verse saying? This verse is saying that if a man has two wives, the one who inherits him is his first son, regardless of whom his mother is. Even if that man hates his mother, hates his son's mother, and loves another wife more, but the inheritance goes to whom? To his eldest son. This means that a man can have two wives. He hates one and he loves another. In Deuteronomy 17, chapter 17, verse 17, it says, "The king shall not have too many wives." That means he could have wives, but just not too many. Maybe less than 100. I don't know how many is not too many. Thus, he can have plenty of wives, but they shouldn't be too many. We also read in Jewish history about certain Jewish historical figures that had more than one wives. For example, Ashwa, Moses, Jacob, Elkanah, David, Solomon. Even though these are prophets that we also accept, but Jews also accept them as prophets. And these prophets, these Jewish figures, they had more than one wife. In Deuteronomy 25, chapter 25, verses 5 to 10, talk about how it is required of a man to marry and support his deceased brother's widow. In Jewish law, if two brothers, one of them dies and he leaves his widow, his brother has to marry his widow. He has to marry his deceased brother's widow. It's not a matter of choice. He has to marry his brother's widow. Do you ever hear this on the news? Do you ever hear about this? That in Judaism, the Old Testament tells you that you have to, you must, it's not a choice. You have to marry your brother's widow, whether you have a wife or you don't. In Exodus chapter 21, verse 10, man may marry wives in addition to the first wife, provided only he possesses the means to maintain them. A man can marry more than one wife as long as he possesses the financial means to take care of all of his wives. And then it continues. He says, he may not, however, compel his wives to live in the same courtyard. Instead, each one is entitled to her own house. If he marries more than one wife, each wife deserves her own house. He cannot put them in the same house. Very much similar to the Islamic ruling. Very much similar to Islam. Islam says if you marry more than one wife, you have to be able to spend on them financially. You have to be capable of spending on them. And you cannot keep them in the same room or same house. You have to provide them different homes. Now, of course, today, if you ask Jews about polygamy or polygyny, they'll tell you we don't practice it. And in Israel today, polygamy is not allowed. It's banned. However, in countries where polygamy is allowed, and there are Jewish communities in such countries, they will practice polygamy. They don't have any problem with practicing it. Why? Because it's part of their religion. The Old Testament recognizes polygamy, and it's completely allowed. Now we come to Christianity. In Christianity, there's various sects, and there's various schools of thought. You have the Protestants, you have the Catholics, you have the Mormons. As for the Protestants and the Reform movements, they accepted polygamy. They accepted it as something valid. They recognized it. In fact, it's part of their Bible. Christians, they believe in the New Testament and the Old Testament, while the Jews, they only believe in what? The Old Testament. But Christians believe in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the Old Testament addresses polygamy. It recognizes and accepts polygamy. Thus, naturally, Christians also have to accept polygamy. Protestants did. Reform movements did. The famous Christian leader by the name of Martin Luther, who was known to be the founder of the Lutheran movement, he recognized polygamy. And when he was asked about it, he legitimized it. He allowed his followers to practice polygamy. For example, he granted the Landgrave Philip of Hesse, a historic figure, the right to take a second wife. He also wrote to the Saxon chancellor that he cannot forbid a person to marry several wives, for it did not did not contradict Scripture. It did not contradict the Bible. Here you have a Christian figure, a famous Christian figure that says polygamy does not contradict the Bible. It does not contradict the Scripture. In fact, some European countries adopted the law of polygamy and allowed it for a certain period of time. When we read the history of Germany, there was a war called the 30 Years' War. There were a lot of casualties. There were a lot of men that died. The ratio of men to women was there was a big difference. Women were a lot more than men. Thus, in Germany, the Parliament of Nuremberg, on February 14th of 1650, it decreed every man allowed to marry up to 10 wives, not 4. Up to 10 wives, each man was allowed to marry. This is Germany. This is Europe. This is a Western country. Before they talk about Islam, let them first read their own history. German history, European history. Now, the Roman Catholic Church took a position against polygamy. And they saw that polygamy contradicted the Bible and the Scripture. St. Augustine, who is a very well-known Roman Catholic theologian, he wrote against polygamy. And he saw that polygamy goes against religion and that it should not be accepted. He wrote in his writings, the famous St. Augustine, he wrote that the good purpose of marriage is better promoted by one husband with one wife than a husband with several wives. And this is shown plainly enough by the very first union of a married pair, meaning Adam and Eve, which was made by the divine being himself. St. Augustine says that the ideal marriage is one husband and one wife, not one husband and several wives. Proof of that is when God created human beings, the first human beings that He created was whom? Adam and Eve. God gave Adam only one wife. He didn't give him several wives. This is proof of this is how it should be. This is what's natural. In every marriage, there's only one husband and one wife. This is Catholics. As for Mormons, Mormons are a well-known sect among Christians. Mormons are known for the practice of polygamy. They're known to marry more than one wife. And they exist in the United States of America and in Canada as well. Mormons are all over America. even though they're concentrated in the state of Utah, yet they're everywhere, and they're known for the practice of polygamy. It began with Joseph Smith, who stated in 1831 that he saw a revelation in which plural marriage should be practiced by Mormon men. Thus him, Joseph Smith, along with some well-known Mormon leaders, they married more than one wife, including Brigham Young, Herbert Kimball, and Smith himself. After a couple of years, Joseph Smith, who saw the revelation regarding polygamy, was killed. And they don't know who exactly killed him. I personally assume that his first wife killed him. Must be his first wife. They moved, Mormons who were all over the United States, they gathered in Utah. Until today, Utah is the capital of Mormons. It's the Mormon capital of the world. And there they continued practicing polygamy freely. And then the United States of America started adopting certain harsh laws against polygamy. They started to move to other countries, and one of them is Canada. Mormons moved to Canada because Canada has less harsher laws regarding polygamy. This is Christianity. As for Hinduism, Hindus have no problem with polygamy. They practice polygamy and they didn't see that it contradicts their religion. Up till 1955, polygamy was permitted for Hindus. But in 1955, the Indian Parliament passed a law called the Marriage Act, the Hindu Marriage Act, which made polygamy illegal in India except for Muslims. Why? We don't know, even though it does not contradict their religion. Now, as for polygamy in Islam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Everyone knows that Islam allows polygamy, or polygyny, to be accurate. But the question is why? Why does Islam allow Muslim men to marry more than one wife? What is the reason? Are there certain conditions? Why is it that in Islam a man can marry more than one wife, but a woman cannot marry more than one husband? What rights does the first wife have? Is she being oppressed, or does she have certain rights? This is what we'd like to examine. When we look at the Quran, of course the basis of our religion, the basis of our law is the Quran. Thus we should come to the Quran and to see what the Quran says about polygamy. We see in the Quran that in Surah An-Nisa, ayah number 3, the Quran says, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدَةً. The verse translates, if you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly with the orphans, marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly between them, then you shall only marry one wife. Thus, according to this verse, it states very clearly that men are allowed to marry women according to their choice, 2 or 3 or 4. Up to 4. Men have the choice of marrying up to 4 wives according to this verse. Yes, with a condition that men have to deal with them justly. These 4 wives, if they end up marrying 4 wives or 2 or 3, they have to treat them justly, and I will comment about this in a minute. But one point we have to keep in mind is that the practice of polygamy existed during the days of Jahiliyyah, before Islam. Before the advent of Islam, the Arab practiced polygamy. In fact, historians mention that some Arab men in the Arabian Peninsula would marry up to 20 wives, 40 wives, less, more. There were no restrictions. Some of the men were wealthy, they had money, and they were able to marry as many wives as possible. This verse reduces the amount of wives that a man can have. You see? There are some people that think Islam increased the amount of wives that a person can have. Previously, men would only marry one wife only. Islam came and said marry 4. No! What was the case is men would marry more than that. They would marry 10, 20, 30. Islam said no. Islam said there must be restrictions. There must be a limit. You can only marry up to 4 wives, not more. Many people don't know this. They think that Islam raised the bar. No, Islam lowered the bar. Islam lowered the number. This is a very important point to keep in mind. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. This verse, ayah number 3 in Surah An-Nisa, when was it revealed? We have to study the context in order to understand this verse better and the concept of polygamy better. We have to understand the context of which this verse was revealed in. This verse was revealed after the battle of Uhud, Ma'arakat Uhud, when many of the Sahaba, many of the companions of Rasulullah were killed. They were killed. Thus, in Medina, many women became widows. Many children became orphans. And the ratio of men to women, it became disproportionate. You had few number of men with a lot of women. This created a social problem. This created a social problem. You have a lot of widows, a lot of orphans that need someone to take care of them, a lot of widows that need a caretaker, not just financially, but even emotionally. Now, a lot of these women were left without a caretaker. They were left without husbands. A lot of these orphans were left without fathers, without someone to take care of them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this verse. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. You may marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. When the Quran revealed this verse, when this law was introduced, this was not a new law, because this existed in Judaism. This existed in Christianity. Thus, Islam was only following the footsteps, was only reviving a tradition that already existed in Judaism and Christianity. This was not something new. Thus, when you hear on the news, in classrooms, in debates, that Islam brought this new concept of polygamy, this is a lie. This is a lie. This is not something new. It existed in their own religion, in their own faith. However, Islam modified it. Islam told the men that you can marry up to 4 wives. However, there's 2 restrictions. Number 1, it's 4. It can't be 5. It can't be 6. It can't be 10. No matter how rich you are, no matter how many women you could marry, it's restricted to 4. This is the first restriction. Second, you have to deal justly between your wives. What do I mean justly? What does the Quran mean by saying just? وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدُلُوا فَوَاحِدًا. This adala that the Quran speaks about, what does it mean? This adala means you treat them equally, financially and with your time. These 2 things, financially and with your time. Meaning, if you buy one of them a house which has 3 bedrooms, you buy the other one a house with 3 bedrooms. If you put one in an apartment, you put another one in an apartment. If you buy one a $2 million house, you buy the other one also a $2 million house. If you spend I don't know how much with shopping, I don't know how many credit cards you give to one, you give another one the same amount of credit cards. You spend exactly the same on both wives, or 3 or 4 of them. You spend exactly the same. Financially, you don't differentiate. You don't buy one thing for one wife and you don't buy for the other. You treat them exactly the same. And number two, with your time. If you spend one night with this wife, you spend the other night with the next wife. You don't spend six nights with one of them and you just give one wife, probably the old wife, the one that you married first, you give her one. No. You give them the same exact nights. However much you spent time with this wife, the new wife that you just married, you give the poor old lady as well. This is adala that the Quran speaks about. You treat them justly. I remember one of our teachers in class one day, Ayatollah Al-Irawani in Najaf, he says that there was a scholar in Najaf who had two wives. One of them was very bad with her husband. She treated him badly. In fact, his exact words was that one of them, her tongue was the tongue of a scorpion. This is how she treated her husband. But the other one, she was nice, she was polite, and she knew how to take care of her husband. But the husband, he would treat them the same exact way, to the point you don't know which one was the good one and which one was the bad one. Which one was the scorpion and which one was the gazelle? I don't know. You choose. Which one was the good one and which one was the bad? Because he treated them exactly the same. If he smiled to one, he would smile to the other. If he would joke around with one, he would joke around with the other. This is adala. Adala in everything. The men that go and marry, many of them, they give a blind eye to this topic, the topic of adala. There's a lot of men, and I've heard stories, here in America, Canada, in Europe, they go back home in Iraq, Afghanistan, I don't know where, and they marry a younger wife, and they forget about the previous wife. With the other wife, and they forget about their first wife. Where's the adala in this? Where's the adala? He thinks if he sends some money, he's doing adala. This is just. This is justice. This is not justice. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Some say, those who are against polygamy, there are some that are anti-polygamy, they say that the Quran says that men cannot be just. Even if they try, they cannot be just. Thus, the Quran actually bans polygamy. It bans polygamy. Where there's a verse in the Quran that says, Surah An-Nisa, the same chapter, verse 129. وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ النِّسَاءِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتُمْ. You will never be able to treat your woman justly, even if you try. Even if you try, no matter how much you try, you will not be able to treat them justly. So if you can't treat them justly, that means what? You cannot marry more than one wife. Some say this is what the Quran is saying. No, this is not correct. Why? Because that means the Quran, if we accept this, that means the Quran contradicts itself. In Surah An-Nisa, verse 3, the Quran says, فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُمْ. Marry. Here, the Quran says, don't marry. No. The Quran does not contradict itself. So then what is this verse talking about? That you cannot treat your wives justly. Scholars here say that the verse is saying you cannot treat your wives justly, meaning you cannot love your wives the same. And this is normal. If a husband has two wives, obviously he's going to love one more than the other. He might love both of them, and this is possible. And we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes. A man has the ability to love two women, but exactly the same? No. This is not possible. He'll obviously love one more than the other. The Quran is saying, even if you try, you will not be able to love them exactly the same. But treat them the same. Even if you love one more than the other, but you have to treat them, if you decide to marry 2 or 3 or 4 wives, you have to treat them the same. Financially and time-wise, you have to treat them the same. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Some say, but Sayyid, you just said that the verse was revealed after the Battle of Uhud, when there were plenty of widows and orphans. That is why Islam legislated polygamy, allowing men to marry more than one wife, because there was not a lot of men and there were a lot of women. But today polygamy should be banned. Why? Because today there's not too many widows and orphans. And if there is, in a couple of countries, in Iraq, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in a couple of countries. But generally, there's not too many widows and orphans. So shouldn't Islam ban the practice of polygamy? This is a question that is posed. The answer. Number one, we said that this was the context of the verse. But the verse doesn't say that men are only allowed to marry widows. The verse says men are allowed to marry women. فَانْكُحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. Nisa means women. Didn't say widows. This is one. Two, there's a phenomenon that we have to understand carefully. وَصَلُّ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ. Yes, today the amount of widows are not too many. Maybe in just a couple of countries. The amount of orphans are not too many. However, the proportion, the ratio of men to women, is it a proportionate ratio or a disproportionate ratio? It's disproportionate. There are more women than there are men. You might say, but this is not correct. On earth, the amount of women is equal to the amount of men. It's exactly equal. If there are 6 billion people on earth, there's 3 billion men and there's 3 billion people approximately. In some countries, in fact, there are more men than there are women. So we don't have more women than there are men for them to marry more than one wife and for polygamy to be legislated. Correct? The question is not about are there more men or are there more women. The question should be, are there more eligible bachelors or are there more eligible bachelorettes? This is a question. Are there more men that are capable of getting married or are there more women that are capable of getting married? Here, the ratio is disproportionate. Here, there are more women that are capable of getting married, that wish to get married, than there are men that wish to get married. Test this in your own community. Test this in your own community. In this community. And I assure you, in 90% of the communities, you will find that you have more young women that are ready to get married, but not enough young men. Not enough young men. Maybe there's 5 young men for every 20 young women that wish to get married, there's only 5 men. There's only 5 men. Test this in your community and in all other communities. But you might ask, why is this? If there are the same amount of men to women on earth, then why is there more eligible bachelorettes than there are eligible bachelors? Why? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. You see, this goes back to the nature of men and women. Women, they think about marriage before men. A young lady at the age of 18 or 19, she's probably thinking of her marriage. She's thinking of her wedding. She's already thinking of her husband. She's ready to get married. And perhaps if someone comes and proposes to her at the age of 18 or 19, she doesn't mind getting married. In fact, there's a lot of young ladies that get married at the age of 18 or 19. But tell me, how many young men at the age of 18 are ready to get married? How many of them are thinking of their weddings? How many of them are thinking of getting married? Most of them at the age of 18, they're thinking about football. They're thinking about who scored tonight and who won. They're not thinking of getting married or a wedding or having a family. Am I right or am I wrong? I think that I'm right. I don't know. From your faces, I could tell that I think you agree with me. Thus, in most communities you will find that there are more women that are willing to get married, that are ready to get married, but there's not enough men. Why? Why is it that at the age of 18, a young woman is ready for marriage, but a man is not ready at the age of 18? The reason is because a man, this is how he's biologically engineered. That first thing, he has to think about his education. Right now, he's thinking he has to get an education. Why? Because he has to be the caretaker. He has to bring the bread home. He has to take care of his family, not his wife. The wife doesn't need to work. She could if she wants, but she doesn't need to. She doesn't need to work. She doesn't need to make a salary. It's the man that has to work and make the salary and make the income. But he has to get an education. He has to get a good degree. He has to get a good job. He has to pay off his loans. He has to get a house, a car, make a steady income, become settled, and then think about marriage. At that age, what age would he be in? Probably 25, 26, 27. That young lady was ready to get married at the age of 18 because she doesn't need to get ready for anything. She doesn't need to prepare a house or an income or a job or even get an education. She could get married right at the age of 18. Correct? Thus, you will have plenty of young women that are ready to get married, but not enough men. You see this phenomenon? Thus, you have this case. In addition to the widows, in addition to the divorcees, in addition to a lot, and there's another problem. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. You know, one of the problems that we have, especially in Western society, that our families will encourage our young women to get an education. That's beautiful. That's perfect. Let our young women get an education. In fact, Rasulullah says, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ وَمُسْلِمَةٍ. Seeking knowledge is mandatory upon all Muslim men and women. However, in some families, we encourage our young ladies to get an education and then to pursue a master's and then to pursue a PhD or to become a doctor, which is excellent. But in some countries, becoming a doctor takes 10 years, 12 years. And those same families, they tell their daughters not to get married. They say, pursue your degree, get married after you get your degree. Because if you get your degree, you'll get married, you'll have children, and you won't be able to become a doctor. Now by the time she finishes, she gets her degree and she becomes a doctor, how old is she? She's about 30 years old. And she's not married. Now at the age of 30, who's willing to marry her at the age of 30? Most young men, they already got married at the age of 23, 24, 25, 26. Not a lot of them are going to marry at the age of, or willing to marry a young lady at the age of 30. You see, this is also one of the problems that exists in our societies and our communities that has not been given much thought. My point is, we are left with a community that is full of young women or even older women that are left without husbands. Most of the men are taken, they got married, and you have plenty of young women that are not married. What happens to them? What happens to them? Islam here asks this question. What happens to these young ladies? Do we dump them in the ocean? Do we get rid of them? This is a social problem. Islam came to solve all of social problems, all of our social problems. And this is a social problem. Thus, Islam says that these women need someone to take care of them. You see, people think that Islam legislated polygamy for the benefit of men. This is not correct. It legislated polygamy for the benefit of women, not men. Because what happens to these women that are left without caretakers? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Some might say that polygamy was applicable 200 years ago, 300 years ago, when women needed a caretaker, a financial caretaker. They didn't work, they sat at home, they needed someone to spend on them. But today most women work. Most women have a good education. They work, they make money. In fact, in some families, women make more money than the man. We've seen such families. The wife makes more money than her husband. Thus, she doesn't need anyone to take care of her. We live now at a time in which women could work. They could make their own living. And even the ones that don't work, the government gives them support. They can live on income support. They can receive housing and medical benefits and income benefits from the government. Thus, she doesn't need to marry a man. Why should polygamy exist till today? These women could be financially supported. The answer, that you are looking at one of the needs and you are overlooking the other needs. Yes, women need financial support. Women need men for financial support, for income. But this is it? She only needs money from him? Nothing else? You are overlooking the other needs, the emotional needs, the spiritual needs, the need of having a companion, the need of having a family. Let the woman be the richest woman on earth. She still needs a husband. She still needs a family. She still needs children. Just because she's making money, or she can make more money than other men, it doesn't mean that she's independent and she doesn't need a man. No, she still needs a man. Khadija alayhi salam was a very wealthy woman. Yet she came and proposed to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. She could have said, I'm wealthy. I don't need any man in my life. I don't need anyone to tell me what to do, what time to come back home and where to go and give me orders. Khadija alayhi salam was wealthy. In fact, Rasulullah was in need of her money. She was not in need of Rasulullah's money. Yet she came and proposed to Rasulullah. She wanted a husband. She wanted a family. She wanted children. And the same goes for men. Some think that men only need women for cooking and cleaning. No, this is not the case. Men don't need women for cooking and cleaning. In fact, in Islam, women are not even required to cook and clean. A man doesn't need a woman just for cooking and cleaning. If it's cooking, there's plenty of restaurants you could order food. If it's about cleaning, there's maids. You can come bring a maid and clean the house. It's not about cooking and cleaning. It's about having a need to start a family, to have a wife, to have children, to have a companion, to have support, at home. A man needs a woman and a woman needs a man. They need each other. They need each other for support. You know, they say, what's the best word, what's the best sentence that a woman can hear from her husband? What is it? What's the best sentence that a woman could hear from her husband? Here's my credit card, you could go shopping. That's the first. The second is, I love you. I love you. This is a word of encouragement. This means the world to a woman when a husband tells her he loves her. It's not about money. Even if he doesn't give her a single dollar, that's fine with her. But as long as there's support. So just because we live at a time in which women do not need financial support and they are financially capable, it doesn't mean that we should eradicate the concept of polygamy. Wa sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There are some that say Islam allows polygamy because Islam is a masculine-dominated religion. It's because Islam is dominated by men. It came to serve the needs of... Look at the laws of Islam. It's all about men and the rights of men and the privileges for men. And this is one of the laws. The law of marrying, being allowed to marry up to 4 wives. It came to serve men's needs, men's sexual desires. This is the reason. The answer is this is not the case. Islam did not legitimize and legalize polygamy for men. If it legalized polygamy for men, if Islam only cared about men's desires, men's sexual desires, it would allow men to go and commit adultery. It would allow men to go and have relationships outside of marriage. They're easier, less expensive. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't need to get married. You don't need to spend. You don't need to be just. None of this. If Islam wanted to look after men's desires and men's interests, Islam would have told men, go and do whatever you want, with whoever you want. But no, Islam came and put conditions. Islam says there must be a marriage that everyone recognizes. You have to spend. You have to treat your wives justly. You have to recognize the child that is born from your second and third and your fourth marriage. While if Islam allowed men to go and commit adultery, for example, he would have a child. He doesn't even need to recognize that child. No responsibilities, no obstacles. Islam says marriage is a responsibility. Thus, Islam didn't do a favor for men when it legalized polygamy. In fact, this marriage is a burden. It's more responsibility. As some men say as a joke, they say one marriage is a headache. Two marriages is two headaches. Those that have 4 wives, that's 4 headaches. Thus, this is a bigger burden. It's a bigger responsibility. Islam did not legalize polygamy for the interest of men. Islam legalized polygamy for the interest of women. Because there will be plenty of women left without caretakers, without husbands, without anyone to take care of them. This is why Islam legalized this subject, this topic, the topic of polygamy. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Some might say, okay, if Islam cares so much about women and Islam is legalizing polygamy for women, why doesn't Islam allow women to marry more than one husband? If there's equality in Islam, why doesn't the opposite also exist? Why can't women also marry more than one husband? The answer. Number one, we talked about a ratio. We said that there are more eligible bachelorettes than there are eligible bachelors. There are more women that are willing to get married than there are men. Thus, if a woman marries another husband, this will increase the problem. It's not going to solve the problem. It's going to increase this is going to mean that there will be less available men. There will be less available men. Thus, this will only increase the problem. It will not decrease the problem. This is one. Number two, women themselves. In fact, what does a woman want from marriage? Why does a woman need a man? She needs support from him, and she wants love from him. If there is one man that is providing her with that support, financial support, psychological support, emotional support, that is all that she needs. Ask any woman on earth that would you want 2 husbands? She'll say no. In fact, she'll even be disgusted. She'll say no. All I need is 1 husband. In fact, some women will even say that one caring husband that gives all the love is hard to find, let alone 2. Let alone 2. 2 men that give all the love, that is almost impossible to find. Thus, women themselves would not even want such a thing. Women themselves would not even think about being with another man while they have a loving, caring, protecting husband. Thus, it would not even cross a woman's mind, that idea. It's not part of her psychology to even consider such a thing. Number three, up till 100 years ago, how would they discover who is the father? Let's say a woman had 2 husbands. Who would they know who's the father? They wouldn't know. They wouldn't know. Up till 100 years ago, the issue of the DNA was discovered. Now, today, they can discover who's the father. But up till 100 years ago, would they be able to discover who the father is? No. Thus, they would not even know who the children would be. In Islam, this is important, the importance of lineage. Children need to know who their fathers are. This is important. Thus, for these reasons, Islam does not allow polyandry, which is the practice of a woman marrying more than 1 husband. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, what about the first wife? The poor, patient first wife that has to deal with a husband that marries a second or third wife. What about her? Is Islam being oppressive? What about her rights? Doesn't this lady have rights, the first wife? Is this fair for her that her husband goes and marries another wife? You see, Islam is fair. Islam is a just religion. Number one, Islam says that a husband has to treat his wife justly. Islam says that a husband cannot oppress his first wife just because he went and married a younger, more beautiful, I don't know what wife. It doesn't mean that he abandons his first wife. No, he treats them exactly the same. This is one. Number two, and this is important for all ladies to know, that Islam gives the right for a lady, for a woman, at the time of the marriage contract to stipulate a condition. At the time of the wedding, she makes a condition. She puts a condition on her husband that I accept to marry you with the condition that you don't marry another wife. This is very much possible. All women at the time of, I'm sure the ladies are now thinking, well, why didn't I know that when I got married? All women have the right at the time of the wedding to make this condition, and the husband has to abide by this condition. He has to. He is obliged to abide by this condition. If she puts a condition that he's not allowed to marry another wife, then he is not allowed to marry another wife. Sallallahu ala Muhammad. I believe that deserves a salawat. Sallallahu ala Muhammad. Now, as we conclude, my dear brothers and sisters, we saw that polygamy was not introduced by Islam. Rather, it existed in Judaism, it existed in Christianity, it existed in Hinduism. As we saw that before Islam, men would marry up to 20 wives, 30 wives. Islam came and reduced the number. Islam did not come and say, did not raise the number to 4. Islam came and reduced the number to 4. Also, let's remember that Islam enforces justice. Islam says that if you are not capable of dealing with them justly, you are not allowed to marry another wife. You have to deal with them justly. Now, we have to keep in mind that today, those who attack Islam, those who say that Muslim men marry more than one wife, do you know how many, right now, how many Muslim men are married to more than one wife? 1%. 1%. Read statistics. Google it. Go on Google and look for statistics. Most statistics say from 1 to 3% of Muslim men have more than one wife. That's it. Just 1 to 3. Just 1 to 3. And what's shocking is that here in the United States of America, how many men cheat on their wives? How many? 3% or 30%? But you don't see that being called injustice. No one calls that injustice. If a Muslim man marries another woman, marries her respectfully, this is a taboo. This is a problem. But here, in this society, in this country, and in Western countries, if a man goes and cheats on his wife, that's perfectly okay. That's okay. No, not just this. In this society, we live in a society. If a man goes and marries another woman, a second wife, this is a taboo. This is a problem. But if a man goes and marries another man, this is okay. This is okay. This is legalized. Right now in the United States of America, they are legalizing this. This is fine. This is human rights. Don't talk about this because this is human rights. A person can marry whoever he wishes to marry, even if it's from his own gender. Didn't we just see on Thursday the CEO of Apple announced this disgusting behavior? The CEO of Apple announced that he practices such an ugly behavior. What do you expect? I was telling some friends that if we buy the new iPhones, I think this is najis. I mean, with a CEO like this, that practices such a thing, I think the new iPhone is going to be najis. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Having said this, we in Islam, we do not encourage polygamy. We do not go and say to all men, go and marry more than one wife. No. In fact, we say that if you are happily married and you have a good wife, keep her and take care of her. You don't need to go and marry another wife. If you don't have a problem, there's no issue, you don't need to go and marry another wife. As Americans say, if it ain't broke, what? Don't fix it. If your marriage is happy, if you're happy with your wife, you have a good wife, why go and marry another wife? Islam doesn't go and encourage you. Islam says that polygamy is for emergency cases. It's for places, countries that are struck with terrorism, that a lot of men are being killed, there's a lot of widows, there's a lot of orphans. In such countries, this is an exception. Thus, Islam says that take care of your wife. If you're happily married, you don't need to go and marry another wife. Take care of this wife. In fact, most men could barely take care of one wife, let alone two wives. We live at times in which husbands can barely make time and provide support, not just financial, but emotional support and love for one wife, let alone two wives or three wives or four wives. Thus in Islam, we don't encourage men to go and marry more than one wife. Take care of your own family first. Yes, it's legalized and it's practical for certain conditions, but it's not encouraged. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Tonight we commemorate Al-Qasim, this young man, this beautiful young man, the son of Imam Al-Hassan. Al-Qasim, according to most historians, he was 14 years old. Back then, at this age, 14, it was customary for young men at this age to what? To get married. It was normal for young men at the age of 14, 15, 16 to get married. Al-Qasim was at a blooming age, 14 years old. Young men at his age think about their wedding. They think about their marriage. They want to start a family back then. But Al-Qasim was giving all of this up, and he wanted to sacrifice his life for his uncle Imam Hussein. Al-Qasim was an orphan. He was 4 years old when his father Imam Al-Hassan had died. He grew up in the house of Imam Hussein alayhi salam for 10 years. For 10 years he lived in the house of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein treated him like his own son, like Ali al-Akbar. He treated him like his own son. On the day of Ashura, Al-Qasim came to his uncle Imam Hussein. My uncle, I wish to enter the battlefield. Give me permission. Imam Hussein saw Al-Qasim. He was the only memory remaining from his brother Imam Al-Hassan. He told him, how can I give you permission to fight? I cannot give you permission to fight. Al-Qasim went back. He saw all the other young men entering the battlefield, fighting. Ali al-Akbar had entered the battlefield and fought and was killed. But he was not being given permission to fight. Al-Qasim began to cry. He went aside. He remembered that his father Al-Hassan had given him a note, a letter. He opened the note. He saw that this letter is addressed to his brother Imam Al-Hussein. Al-Qasim brought the letter to his brother Imam Al-Hussein. He said, his uncle Imam Hussein. He said, read the letter. The letter was from his brother Imam Al-Hassan. The letter said, Akhi Aba Abdullah, my brother Aba Abdullah, a day will come in which you will need supporters and soldiers. You will be left all alone. Allow my son Al-Qasim to be one of your soldiers. Allow him to sacrifice his life for your sake. Imam Hussein put the letter away. He grabbed Al-Qasim. They hugged. وَجَعَلَا يَبْكِيَانِ سَاعَةً. They remained crying for 1 hour, the uncle and the nephew, saying goodbye to each other. And then Imam Al-Hussein brings a basket which had the turban of Imam Al-Hassan and the sword of Imam Al-Hassan. Al-Qasim puts on the turban of Imam Al-Hassan and he holds the sword of Imam Al-Hassan. He's about to enter the battlefield, but his father, his uncle Imam Hussein says, go to your tent. Go to your mother's tent, Ramla, and say your last farewell to her. Al-Qasim comes into the tent and he says, my dear mother, Ramla, fi amanillah, I say my last farewell to you. I'm about to go. My mother, Ramla. It's as if Al-Qasim is saying this to his mother, Ramla, as some poets say. He says, my dear mother, Ramla, if you see a young man getting married, then remember your son who didn't get married. If you saw a wedding procession passing by, remember your young son who never got married. If you drink some water after I die, remember your young son who never drank water. Ramla stands in front of Qasim. She says, my dear son, stand in front of me so that I may remember you forever. Go, turn around so that I may take a good look at you, my son, so that I never forget you. Al-Qasim says his farewell to his mother. He enters the battlefield. He began to fight. He fights like a warrior. He fought like a champion. He killed several of the enemy soldiers. One of the enemy soldiers, he looks at Al-Qasim and he tells to his, by God, I will kill him and make his uncle sit and mourn him. He approaches Al-Qasim. Al-Qasim's shoelace breaks. Al-Qasim bends to fix his sandal. This enemy soldier comes and hits Al-Qasim on his head. Al-Qasim falls to the ground. Amma alayka minni salam. My dear uncle, peace be upon you. فهذا جدي قد سقاني بكأس الأوفى شربة لا أظمأ بعدها أبدا. My dear uncle, this is Rasulullah sitting next to me, giving me a cup of water, quenching my thirst. Imam Hussein comes to him. He lies next to him. He removes the sun and sand from his forehead. يعز على عمك أن تدعوه فلا يجيبك أو يجيبك فلا يعينك أو يعينك فلا يغني عنك شيئا. تبا لقوم قتلوك ومن خصمهم يوم القيامة جدك وأبوك. My dear nephew Qasim, I'm very sorry that you call me, but there's nothing I can do for you. Al-Qasim moments later passes away. Imam Hussein carries Al-Qasim back to the tent. He puts him next to Ali al-Akbar into the tent. He stands. Moments he looks at Ali al-Akbar and he cries. Moments he looks at Al-Qasim and he cries. As Sayyidah Zainab comes, she tells him, Ya Aba Abdullah, I have a request for you. Can you please leave the tent? Why? Why do you want me to leave the tent? Because Layla and Ramla wish to come and sit next to their boys. They wish to sit next to their martyrs and cry. But they're embarrassed of you. They don't want to cry in front of you. Imam Hussein leaves. Ramla and Layla come and sit. Layla sits next to Ali al-Akbar. Ramla sits next to Al-Qasim. Yabni, Yabni, يبني لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله. اللهم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا عيبا إلا سترته ولا خوفا إلا آمنته ولا رزقا إلا بسطته ولا شملا إلا جمعته ولا مرضا إلا شفيته ولا غائبا إلا حفظته وأدنيته ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا والآخرة لك فيها رضا ولنا فيها صلاح إلا قضيتها ويسرتها يا أرحم الراحمين. ولأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والشهداء نقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.